Hello and welcome back to my second Thoughtful Thursdays. In this video series, we are attempting to look at faith through a different lens. How many of you have been bored with faith in the past because it doesn't speak to the things that are important in your life?
And now I would like us to look at Paul's second missionary journey around the Mediterranean.
There are parts of faith that when I grew up, and parts of my faith that I've taught even in the past before, that my friends outside the church just are like, nah, I don't need that in my life. And they're like, if that's your good news, you can keep that. I've got Harry Potter, I've got Starbucks and binging on Netflix. Heck, I can watch Bob Ross if I need to. He's every bit as fulfilling and with a lot less condemnation and shame. And I don't blame them. In many ways, we completely lost my generation and the generation after them. And they left for good reasons. I want to start this video series to address some of those issues right now. Last week, we looked at a biblical framework for how to interpret the Bible, and we took on biblical inerrancy. Please go back and watch that video if you haven't had a chance to see it yet. This week, we're going to be looking at creation and Hebrew cosmology. So before we get going, why don't you hit pause and grab a drink, and we'll see you back in a sec. Thank you. Is that scotch or apple juice? You get to choose. The opening lines, according to the Hebrew scriptures, often referred to as the Old Testament, are Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So that's often translated as a statement, as something that's done. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's a sentence, it's an act, it's a done deal. However, it's a dependent clause. It needs more. Maybe this would be a more accurate statement. When God began creating the heavens and the earth, or when God created the heavens and the earth. According to many scholars, I'm actually correcting the way that Western Christianity has viewed these scriptures. If it were in the beginning, as is oftentimes translated, it would say Ba-re-shit. However, it doesn't. It says Be-re-shit, which means that it is a dependent clause. It needs something else. Genesis 1:1 was not in itself an act of creation. It is instead setting the stage for Genesis 3's first act of creation, which was the creation of light. You see, this first verse was actually tied to the next verses after it. Why is this important to us? Because it goes against the idea that either one, science and the Bible are at war with each other, or two, that they can actually prove each other to be true. Genesis 1 does neither of those two. You see, it's popular right now in faith to be able to say something like this: well, I believe in a literal Genesis and in science. And then they would go on to say, well, modern science talks about this idea of a big bang. For them, they would say, like, and there was a bam, everything came out of existence from the nothingness. However, that idea only is able to come to fruition if we interpret it as, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. However, if it is really saying, when God created the heavens and the earth, what's the next section that we have after that in the Bible? If we correctly translate this term in Hebrew, there was already an earth that God was in the middle of creating. And what did that earth look like? It looked like water. It looked like chaos, and it looked like wind. My friend Caden Mills helped me to be able to illustrate this next video that we're going to watch that shows us what ancient cosmology looked like for the Hebrew people at this time, including all the stories that people would have been handing down from time to time, including the people who were writing the book of Genesis at this time. So here we have a circle being made. Imagine, if you will, the circle is completely filled with water. And out of the water, we have a landmass that is being formed. Out of the chaos, out of the wind and the water, the land is formed. Here are the pillars of the earth going down to the foundation. In the middle, we have Sheol, which is the underworld. And now we have the solid dome, which is called the Rakia, where the sun, the moon, and the stars are placed into it, along with the floodgates. This Rakia separates out the waters from above and the waters from below. And it is solid. We know that because even the term Rakia comes from the stem, which means hammered out. It is something solid. And then once again, water above, water below, and that is Hebrew cosmology. The stories that the ancient people who wrote the Bible believed did not look like our cosmology. It would be a grave error for us to try and mix those two together, to try and reconcile the two. The idea of this creation story of being translated and interpreted literally is purely something that is cultural. We don't need to be coerced into believing that type of thinking. And I know there'll be pushback on this type of idea, especially from people who love answers in Genesis. They will say, well, Kyle, what about this article that I just read on answers in Genesis? No, the problem herein lies in the fact that the answers in Genesis people need the Bible to be the literal scientific fact for how the cosmos was started. I, however, with my love of science and my love of learning languages, scream at the fact. We don't go into it thinking this is how it has to be. We should not look at the Bible with the need for it to be translated literal and inerrant. We should look at it instead as a blank slate, not how I want it to be interpreted, rather how it should be interpreted. And that, simply put, is that the Bible was never meant to be a scientific textbook. It just wasn't meant to be. Let's take another quick look at another creation story, the Babylonian epic, the Enuma Elish, that my son Ethan helped me to create.
In the beginning, there was the pit of despair.
Sorry.
In the beginning, there was nothing but water. Undifferentiated water, fresh and salt, chaotically swirling together. There was no sky, there was no earth, just water. And there were two gods to reign over this water. There was Apsu, god over the fresh water, and Tiamat, goddess over the salt water. They loved each other. In fact, they loved each other so much that they had kids. Don't worry, this is PG. However, the kids were super loud and made a racket. Tiamat was annoyed, but wouldn't say anything. Apsu, however, was quite upset, and as in the case with most males, was going to fix this solution, no matter if the wife liked it or not. Apsu was all like, "I'm gonna kill those kids!" And Tiamat, "No, don't!" Well, Ea got word of this plan and decided to preemptively kill Apsu. Tiamat's beloved husband was now dead. She was heartbroken. She went into a complete rage. She was going to enact vengeance. And to make a long story short, nobody wanted to face her. So Marduk was talked into confronting the beast. Marduk and Tiamat met. It was the showdown of showdowns. And Tiamat spoke to Marduk. "My name is Tiamat, goddess of the deep. You killed my husband. Prepare to die!" They burst into epic combat of legendary proportions. Mighty Marduk, however, came into this fight with the four winds at his disposal. He conjured up a mighty windstorm and threw it at Tiamat. It was a direct strike. The storm went all the way into the mighty dragon's belly, bloating it and making it distended as if pregnant. Marduk readied an arrow, and he shot the arrow right into Tiamat's belly, killing her. The mighty sea serpent, the goddess of the deep, was no more. Then Marduk did something amazing. He split her in half like a shellfish. With bloody blame for blade, he bravely broached her boiling bloody breast. Wait, no, that's a different story. Behold, the great serpent body was rent in twain, and Marduk grabbed half of Tiamat and thrust her body into the sky, creating a dome overhead. He told the dome overhead not to allow her waters to escape. Marduk then proceeded to place the sun, the earth, and the moon into the massive structure that he had stretched out across the sky. He also placed the constellations in it. He then fashioned the waters on the land out of another part of her body, waters above, waters below. Marduk then reigned supreme. The end.
In the beginning, when creation was started, there was nothing but water, a deep abyss. It was this unseparated water. Another part of this epic poem says that Marduk actually crushed Tiamat's head before he divided her into two. He then took her body and he tore it into two and made the dome in the sky and stretched it out to be this solid dome that was in the sky. And this dome separated the waters from above from the waters from below. And he told the waters to stay behind the dome. And then the sun and the moon and the stars were all placed into that dome, and the constellations were placed into that dome again. And Tiamat, one of the characters, is this chaotic water serpent monster. In the Genesis creation story, we have this same water. It's a chaotic primordial water. There was no land. In fact, in Genesis, out of the water then comes the land. There was a separation of water and land. And the same thing happens in the Enuma Elish. In the Babylonian epic, this water god is called Tiamat. And in Genesis, the same water is called Tehom. Now just wait to see what happens when you take the word Tehom and you make it an intensified plural. It goes to Tehamat, which is a proper name. Tehamat, Tiamat. Interesting. Wait, it gets even better. You didn't know that the Bible actually talks about God slaying a giant water serpent as a part of the act of creation, did you? We read this in Isaiah 51:9. Was it not you who cut Rahab in pieces, who pierced the dragon? Rahab was the name of an ancient mythical sea monster that represented chaos. And then we read this in Psalm 74. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the dragons in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. Then we jump further down. You established the luminaries in the sun. You have fixed all the bounds of the earth. You made the summer and the winter. Once again, we see this idea of it is God who does the creating. It's God who slayed this beast. It's God who spread out the luminaries in the dome. He set them in, and even the seasons are changing because of that. So what are we supposed to do with all of this knowledge? On the chopping block for today is this literal interpretation of Genesis. It is not essential to following Jesus in the slightest, and it isn't needed. Evidence shows us that the authors of the Bible actually didn't really believe these stories either. In fact, it was a widely known fact that the earth was spherical and not flat. Instead, the authors of the Bible used these prevailing stories of the cultures of the time and the surrounding religions to be able to tell a story and to convey a message. Why does all that matter to us? It matters because we are keeping people right now away from faith because of the way that we view Genesis. You see, the Genesis creation story was never an attempt to scientifically explain anything. It isn't science, and it was never meant to be. Science answers for us the question of how things came to be. Faith answers the question of who. Which brings us to the purpose of this text. The Genesis creation story sets the monotheistic God apart from the polytheistic religions of the time. The supreme God of the Hebrew Bible is the Creator. This is a very powerful and beautiful part of the Bible. It's not a weakness. It says that those other things, the moon, the stars, the sun, are no longer deities. They're just rather acts of creation by the one God. It's actually a rather bold move and kind of funny if you think about it. The authors of Genesis are referring to what are gods and are worshipped in other cultures as just balls. It says that, those gods that you worship, well, they're just balls to us. You've got a big ball, you've got a small ball. One to rule the day, one to rule the night. They're just balls. One hangs a little bit lower than the other. I'm like, dang. People who need to interpret this literal scientific interpretation of creation completely misunderstand the entire purpose of this creation story. The creation story says, our God is kick-ass. Why would we need to defend it? As my wife says, it's kind of like trying to make Romeo and Juliet out to be a self-help marriage book. Defending a 6-day literal creation makes Christians look ridiculous to people who might otherwise look into faith. And it is a stumbling block that is completely unnecessary. Well, now that we solved that one, I guess we can go on to next week where we're going to be talking about biblical authorship. You won't want to miss it. Please hit subscribe down below if you'd like to see more videos like this. We'll see you next week.
Pardon me, are you Tiamat?
Sir, that depends. Who's asking?
Oh, sure, infer. I go by Marduk. I'm a god. I got an arrow for you.
I'm getting nervous, sir.
And I am not throwing away my shot. No, I am not throwing away my shot. Hey, yo, I'm just like your hubby. I'm short, stout, and ugly, and I'm not throwing away my shot. I'm gonna get a scholarship to King's College. I probably shouldn't brag, but dag, I'm amazing and astonished.